To be able to distribute applications we just saw, App Center still needs a few things from us. And we're going to be starting working with Android to give App Center what it needs to be able to distribute to devices. So we have seen how App Center requires us to sign up these builds so the devices can actually install them. This is simply a security measure that is greatly important for both Google and Apple, so our applications can be installed. So what I'm going to do is right here in Visual Studio is first going to select my Android project as a startup project, going to change the configuration to release. And once this is in release, I will right click on my Android project and select Archive for Publishing. This is not really what we want to do. We don't want to generate an APK from here, but this step will allow me to create what is called a key store that App Center was actually requiring from me. So with this new archive selected, I'm going to select over here Sign and Distribute. The UI in Visual Studio 2017 for Windows is slightly different, but you should be able to see the same options. In here, I am going to select Ad Hoc, Next, and in here, I am going to be creating a brand new key. So I will select Create a New Key, and it's important that the alias, the passwords that you set in here, you remember them. So go ahead and create your password, and later on you will have to set at least one of these options. Your first and last name, the organization unit, the organization. I'm going to set the organization in my case, and going to click on OK. This is going to go ahead and generate this new key. Now, I don't need to continue here in the Android signing identity because all of that is going to happen directly from the App Center. The reason why I came here was simply to create this key. Of course, there are other ways in which to create them. One is directly from Android Studio, one from the console. I feel since we're working with Visual Studio already, we can do it right here. Now, what I want to do is figure out where this key was created. So I will just right click on it, select Show Alias Info, and over here we're going to see its location down here. So I will just go ahead and open my terminal, and in my terminal I'm going to navigate over there. So I will simply cd into that directory. And once I am in that directory, I will write open dot to actually open this. And here is where we're going to find this .keystore file. This is the one that we need over on App Center. So let me actually go ahead and cancel this and navigate back to App Center. Over here in App Center, we are on our Android application, and I will finally be able to go over to the configuration over here of the build. I'm going to leave this, of course, as debug, to build on push, the build number with timestamp. The thing that we are going to be doing is signing the build. And notice that precisely we're going to be requiring a key store file, which I already have over here. So I can just drag and drop. And here is where it's going to be important that you remember, of course, your password and the alias. So I remember that the alias was LPA Finance, and I will write the password. Now the password for the key store is actually going to be the same password as the key if you created it from Visual Studio. And once we have this, I'm actually just going to set to distribute the build. And this build in particular is going to be distributed to collaborators. Because this is the developers branch, this is going to collaborators. So now I can actually save this. But notice that we can also save and build. So of course we can always build manually. With this configuration is also going to be built automatically on every push. But since we hadn't configured App Center when we made the last push, let me go ahead and save and build manually. And this is going to take a few minutes to build. It would take longer if you select, by the way, to build and test on a real device. I didn't, so it shouldn't take that long. If you do select to test on real devices, it can take up to 15, maybe 20 minutes in my experience. With this, it maybe takes 5-6 minutes. Now let's go ahead and do the same thing for testers. I am going to configure this build. This is going to still be debug, still be building on every push, timestamp, and will now be signing the builds. So let me drag and drop my key store file, write my password, write the alias, and select this build to be distributed to my alpha testers Android group. I will also go ahead and select save and build. Now, with the master branch, I actually want to distribute this to the store. So if I want to configure this for store, you may remember we need something more. So if we were to sign this build and distribute this to the stores, we actually need to connect to Google Play, and Google Play is requesting something else from us. The key store is not going to be enough. So we're actually going to be leaving this for a further lecture. For now, let's just focus on how to distribute this to ourselves, the developers, and to the testers. And you can see how the build now for developers has been completed. Which means, and let me go ahead and show you my Android device in here, we can actually navigate over to install.appcenter.ms like this. And of course, we're going to need to log in. In my case, I had already logged in, but you would have to log in again with your GitHub, Microsoft, Google, Facebook account, the one, of course, that you use to sign in over here on App Center. And notice that I now find this finance.android app. Of course, I did find it even before we build and sign this developers branch. By the way, I am seeing the one for developers because I am the developer. If I were a tester, I would see all of those available for testers, and I will navigate over to this application. And notice that immediately I am going to see this release. And this is actually today's date, and we see that it's the only release, the one that we have just made, and it's available because it has already been built. In the case of testers, this is not yet built, so we wouldn't be able to see that yet. But let me go ahead and select download. And as soon as I hit on download, this application is going to go ahead and be downloaded. So I can actually just hit on open right here in this little notification. And I'm going to navigate here. This is simply Android things doing Android things. This is a simple installation of any APK. So I will go ahead and install this. It's going to take, of course, a few seconds to install. And once this is installed, I can click on open and the application is going to be opened. Now, if you see your application crashing immediately, I did find that by default, and let me just navigate over to Visual Studio. By default, if you right click on your Android project, go to options, and you are on the debug option, which is, by the way, where the configuration that we're using to build this particular version of the application for both testers and collaborators, so the developers and the testers branch, the use shared mono runtime is enabled by default. You want to disable this. So if you use the debug configuration and you see this option, your application may not run, just go ahead and deselect this and push these changes. So all you will have to do is right click on the Android project, go to version control, review and commit, and push the changes. Of course, this will be pushed over to developers or whatever branch you select. And because we have configured that, it will automatically rebuild the project and then your application should be able to run. But this is pretty much everything that you need to do to be able to distribute your applications. Of course, in the case of Android, we are now going to be signing these builds. And in fact, you can go over to the overview and see what your latest release is about. And you could see all of the releases, and in the build tab you will always, by the way, see how the testers branch has been built now, and you will be able to see all of these changes in here. Now in the next lecture we're going to do the same thing for iOS. It's going to require a bit of a different thing in there. Basically we are already distributing for Android. But for now, in the next lecture we're going to take a look at that package signing for iOS.